Israel carried out a raid in central Gaza this weekend to free 4 hostages. Now, the raid was in Sarat, in 2 apartment buildings where the hostages had been stashed away by Palestinian families. For a brief moment, there was much elation, celebration, Israelis dancing, cheering, etc., all over the news there. A raid of this type has been rare. Only 7 hostages freed in this manner, underscoring how many more hostages are still in captivity or actually dead. But this moment of elation does give way to political hardship, with Benny Gantz fulfilling his promise to step down from the Israeli war cabinet, leaving Netanyahu's position perhaps in peril.
But by the time the weekend was over, the death toll of Gazans from the raid reached 274 per the Associated Press. The backlash about the cost of life to Palestinians and the morality of carrying out a raid in a dense refugee camp has been fierce on social media. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is en route to meet yet again with Netanyahu. But here now to discuss the events of the weekend and what it means for Israel, the Palestinians, and Hamas is Hussein Ibish, the senior resident scholar, Arab Gulf States Institute. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So there's a lot of reporting coming out of this, as has been the case every time Israel's escalated the ground invasion. Most people are focusing on the fact that there was potentially the U.S. hostage cell involved, and that there was U.S. involvement coming out of the port created for humanitarian aid. What's your opinion, if any, this has an impact on the hostage negotiations that are ongoing for a ceasefire?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it puts a bit more pressure on Hamas, but I don't think Hamas is really responding to the kind of pressure, that is to say, public opinion in Gaza, public opinion internationally, that might change their minds. As far as Israel is concerned, it probably slightly hardens their positions. But, Netanyahu was always very clear that he wasn't interested in the proposal that Biden presented as an Israeli plan. It's not an Israeli plan. It comes straight out of the White House. Neither Netanyahu nor Hamas have accepted it. And I don't think this latest turn of events changes the equation very much either way.
Yeah, Biden, I agree with you, is trying to, force on these warring groups an agreement that will make Biden's own political position better with his upcoming re-election. So many Americans dissatisfied with what's happening. The U.S. wants to, maintains involvement, maintains support for Israel, supplies weapons and aid to Israel, but cannot actually seem to have much impact on the trajectory of the war. What does that say about Biden's actual influence?
Well, I think it says something about the United States' actual influence. Biden is in the same position all other presidents have been, where U.S. relations with Israel are more a function of domestic politics than of foreign policy. And that's just a reality. Israel has so much support in the mainstream of the Democratic Party, among traditional liberals, Jewish groups, unions, things like that, that really have been traditionally very pro-Israel and remain so. Now, there's a generational gap where younger liberals, especially under 35 or 30, are very skeptical about Israel, but the mainstream of the party and most of its infrastructure remains pro-Israel, so that's a constriction. And then there's a rise of the even more kind of not just pro-Israel, but pro-Greater Israel, pro-occupation and pro-annexationist Republican Party driven by evangelicals who are looking for the second coming of Jesus Christ and who are anticipating the apocalypse. And they're not pro-Israel so much as pro-Israel creating a war that will bring the return of Jesus. And that's actually really what many of them think. So you do have a lot of pressure on both the left and the right. And in an election year, it really limits the options that someone like Biden might have otherwise. I mean, in other words, I think if he secures a re-election, his attitude towards Netanyahu would probably harden on, in late November, as soon as the election is confirmed, if that's true. Donald Trump, of course, remains a wild card, but even he is greatly driven by public opinion. And he was, he likes to say he was the most pro-Israel president ever. He wasn't. I think Biden has been. But Trump was the most pro-annexation president. Trump was an anti-peace president, right? He wanted Israel to annex 30% of the West Bank, or he didn't want it, but he proposed it. He changed the Overton window on a two-state solution, giving a permission structure for Republicans to be openly opposed to Palestinian statehood. And that's really a sad commentary.
A lot of the reporting around hostages that were taken by Hamas that have been killed by Israel since October 7th,
Right.
There's just been reports in all directions, including Hamas releasing a video after this weekend saying that there were 3 additional hostages killed in the bombardment, one including an American. And the Army released a statement saying that it will not respond to statements by terrorist organizations. Do you believe the Army will investigate this, whether or not hostages were killed, including an American?
No. The Israeli military does not investigate itself except in order to exonerate itself. There's a very long history of the Israeli military just BSing everybody to an extreme extent. They have extremely little credibility with anybody who's followed Middle Eastern politics. And, I think it's very different when there's a blue ribbon commission in Israel designed to look into the trajectory of Israeli policies. For example, the Kahan Commission that looked into the war in 1982 and the massacres at the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camps outside of Beirut. That was a pretty serious investigation, to the point that annexes to the document where the real truth probably is are still hidden from the public. But even so, they did eventually conclude that Ariel Sharon was personally responsible, that Israel had been responsible itself indirectly, and I think in the annex it probably says directly, because that's, I think, the case. For this massive massacre, this historic massacre of Palestinian refugees in Beirut. So the Israeli military, though, generally speaking, just exonerates itself whenever it investigates itself. And I don't think we can expect anything out of that. I do think a number of hostages, I don't know the number now, but it's certainly in the many double digits, have been killed by Israeli bombardment. And there was this famous case of 2 Israeli soldiers who were reported dead from Gaza. And the Israelis said they were executed by their Hamas kidnappers. And the 2 mothers thought this was fishy. And they investigated, and they forced the Israeli government to admit that these soldiers in Gaza were killed by Israeli bombardment. So the Israeli government and the military had been lying very directly to the mothers of the hostages about who killed their children and who killed their adult soldier son. So I wouldn't expect anything out of that.
Well, what about the argument that that's ultimately the fault and responsibility of Hamas for taking them hostage in the first place? Obviously, a tremendous number of civilian, innocent Palestinians dying during this effort to liberate the hostages, but the hostages, were being held by Palestinian families, even under international law. Infrastructure becomes a legitimate military target under such circumstances. So they'll say, Hamas could free them, and then the violence would stop.
Yeah. I think that's also a true argument. I mean, look, Hamas definitely it's completely unlawful to kidnap people and to hold them prisoner. I mean, if you're a uniformed combatant or a soldier is one thing. But these civilians, like this young woman, for example, who's been rescued, grabbed from a rave. I mean, even though Hamas and its supporters like to say, well, people living under foreign military occupation have a right to armed resistance. That's true. But nothing gives you the right to shoot people in their homes, to kidnap people from concerts, to take them and hold them. That's a violation of international law. And in this huge massacre that has taken place to free these hostages, 275 Palestinians dead, most of them women and children, big majority civilians. There's blood on everybody's hand here. Hamas put these people, the Palestinian civilians, in danger by kidnapping Israelis and getting Palestinian families, who are obviously collaborators with Hamas and probably Hamas members in most cases, to hold them. And this is a provocation. And yeah, it does actually turn those civilian homes into legitimate targets. I think that's true. On the other hand, nothing could justify killing 275 people in order to free four. I mean, the Israeli military, basically what happened, as far as we can tell, is they went in, they grabbed the people, and then there was pushback from Hamas fighters. And at that point, the Israelis unleashed hell on earth, and without any concern for Palestinian civilians. And that's the way this war has gone from the beginning. Hamas provokes Israel. Israel responds in a way that is targeting the entire area, targeting everyone without any real concern about the Palestinian civilians. And I think both sides here are showing absolute contempt for the lives of Palestinians. Hamas toying with them as if they were so many playthings, and Israel prepared to just kill every Palestinian in the way and shoot everything that moves. And this has been their policy from the beginning. So I see two extraordinarily guilty parties. And I hope some of them end up in the prisoner's dock at The Hague in the International Criminal Court someday, because they sure deserve it.
Yeah, Hussein, Ibish, thank you so much for joining us to break all this down. We really appreciate it.
Really welcome. Thank you.